Hello, councillors. Can you get ready in a minute or so so we can go live, please? Thank you. You look very smart, Councillor Smart, as always. Well, I didn't say respectable. Everyone, I'd like to welcome you all to the Cambridge City Council's Planning and Transport Scrutiny Committee meeting. This includes members here in the chamber. Are anybody attending online?
2 officers, but no members.
Okay, and those attending virtually, and those members of the public who are watching the live stream via the Council's YouTube channel. My name is Councillor Simon Smith, and I'm the chair of this committee meeting. Please can those present in the Council chamber note that everything on your desk, including your laptop screen, could be broadcast at some point, as cameras within the chamber follow the microphone being switched on. If you are following the team meeting here in the chamber on your laptop or audio, microphone and camera must be switched off. If the fire alarm sounds, please follow officers who will leave the chamber and exit the building via the Pease Hill staircase and exit. Do not use the lift. I will now roll call councillors alphabetically by surname so the public can see who you are. We received apologies from councillors Bick, Pora, Davies, Herbert. Councillors Page-Croft and Copley are attending as alternates. Please advise if you have any apologies from any other councillors when I ask you to speak. Well, I'll say something. Councillor Bajan is going to be arriving late. So are you present? Councillor Copley?
Yes.
Councillor Page-Croft?
Here, Chair.
Councillor Scutt?
Present.
Councillor Smart?
Present.
Councillor Swift?
Present.
We are also joined by Executive Council for Planning, Policy and Infrastructure, Councillor Thornborough.
Hello, everyone. Thanks.
Officers present for this meeting are Joint Director for Planning and Economic Development, Stephen Kelly.
Good afternoon.
Our Assistant Director of Planning and Building Quality, Heather Jones, is attending virtually. And here she
Good
is.
afternoon.
Delivery Manager, Strategic Sites, Philippa Kelly, is also attending virtually.
Hello.
Team Manager, Claire Tunnicliffe.
Hello.
And Meeting Producer, Boris Herzog. The meeting procedure for each agenda item. The committee will receive a presentation for the relevant report author. Members will then discuss the report and vote on recommendations. As chair, if the vote is split, I will have the casting vote. Following the vote of the committee, the Executive Council will be asked if they agree with the decision. Messages have been covered in the introduction. Have I missed any? No, thank you. Agenda item 2. Please could committee members declare if they have any declarations of interest and identify which agenda item their declaration relates to. No declarations of interest. Agenda item 3, minutes. As there are no minutes for the committee's approval of public speakers, I will move straight to item 5. You now turn to agenda item 5 on page 3 of your agenda papers. This is the Greater Cambridge Shared Planning Service Compliance Policy. This is a key decision. The Assistant Director of Planning and Building Quality, Heather Jones, will present this item. Heather, could you please introduce the paper? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure you will all be aware that we've been undertaking a transformation of the planning compliance team and the activities that they undertake. And as part of that, we've looked to have a unified approach to handling planning enforcement by both councils, emphasising on early intervention and compliance. So as part of that review, that we have come up with a unified Greater Cambridge shared planning compliance policy. And we are asking that you adopt this unified policy tonight. So the review has also included our processes, the use of IT to improve workflow, an update of the website, including guidance with a video, and members will be aware that enforcement is discretionary, and national guidance provides that we need to do it in a proportionate manner where it is expedient to do so, and the policy outlines that. We're obliged to keep an enforcement action register up to date, and we have now got that published on our public access system. And again, that is referred to in the policy document. The policy also sets out how we will monitor the implementation of planning permissions, investigate cases of unauthorised development, and act where appropriate. Previously, as I said, we had two separate compliance plans, and these have now been amalgamated. In summary, the new document sets out what is and what is not a breach of planning control, and the responsibilities of the owner, occupier, and users of a development in the event of a breach of control, the priorities and response times in dealing with complaints and breaches, outcomes of investigations, and the powers available to both councils. We did undertake a formal consultation process, and this was undertaken over a period of 6 weeks, starting in the 9th of December up until 20th of January. This was published on the website, circulated to all members and other interested parties. We had a total of 9 responses, 5 online and 5 via email, and they were reviewed and the policy was updated if necessary. So the policy itself is as I say, is a unified, combined policy, and I think outlines the way that we want to operate in future as part of Greater Cambridge Shared Planning Compliance Team. I just want to draw members' attention to, and I'm just scrolling down, so apologies, my computer's a bit slow today. So we have got in there, as I said, the role of the owner, occupier and user of land and buildings, service standards and priorities, what we do when investigating, what if the complaint is against a person, the enforcement register and delegated powers, and then our responsibilities for information sharing. Alongside this, we will be doing some case studies, but we are going to add them onto our website to enable members of the public and residents to have a better understanding of compliance, the team, and the area that they operate within. And that's it. So thank you.
Are there any questions arising from the report?
Thank you, Chair. I'll specify whether the question is from myself or from Councillor Sam Davies. So firstly, some queries from Councillor Davies. The first is, does the policy use all the powers that we are able to under national legislation? And is there anything that we could do legally that isn't reflected in the policy? The second question, also from Councillor Davies, is a detailed point relating to item 6.1. to read out what 6.1 states. Before you make a complaint, you are encouraged to check the Shared Planning Service website to consider whether there is planning permission already for the development or to review the conditions. And Councillor Davies comments that if members of the public are expected to do this, then it's imperative that documents relating to an application within the planning portal are clearly titled and that all applications relating to a particular property are properly labelled, and comments the finding which I agree with, which is that often this is not the case. And I'll also add that if you go on map view, it only shows very recently approved or items which are still under discussion. So you can't necessarily use a map to help you find a piece of land, especially if the land doesn't have a very clear address, like land north of point X. In terms of my comments, the first is regarding the consultation response of 9 responses, which seems quite a poor consultation response. What were we hoping was going to be a good response? And do we know, more about that? Like, is this suitable consultation? And then my second question is about the use of enforcement powers. And in some areas within planning, it's clear that there's systemic racism through the way the planning service functions. For example, often members of the Gypsy, Roma and Traveller community struggle to get planning permission due to local opposition to them having a new site. And I don't think there's anything in terms of how the enforcement powers have been written or described that suggests that. But I wonder if the way that we enforce planning, there is a way to collect, if known, protected characteristics about people who are having enforcement action against them. So that in a general way, without details, the planning service could therefore audit itself whether it was disproportionately targeting people with certain characteristics. That's everything, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Copley. Heather, do you want to take those point by point, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So in respect of your the first comment from, I think that was your colleague about national legislation, I think there are other legislation that we haven't referred to in this document, but that doesn't mean that we wouldn't be able to take that into account. But that legislation is more widely than just for this document. So I would say, dangerous structures. So that would come under the Building Act. So there are other pieces of legislation. So it's not a total list, but is confined to those that we would use more often in this policy. That doesn't stop us from using other legislation if we have the appropriate powers to do so through the appropriate delegations. In respect to 6.1, where you talked about, or again, your colleague talked about documents being properly labelled, and you found that that often is not the case. We are doing a review with Planning Portal, and in fact they came recently to do at our Agents Forum to do a presentation, and it will be available on YouTube should you wish to watch it, and that talks about the improvements that they're making both to the labelling and also to the mapping system. So we hope that that will help to make those improvements and make that better for members of the public. We welcome any feedback as well, so I will take that back to the team and see if there's anything else or if there's anything specific that your colleague can tell us. That would be really helpful so that we can try and address. We do know of some issues and we are trying to address them through the Planning Portal where we possibly can. The consultation response, what was it what we were hoping for? I think we were expecting more simply because compliance is such a big area within the council. So I think it was a big area that is quite, quite topical amongst residents, obviously, quite rightly. So we thought that there would be more interest and more people would respond. We were very proactive. We used social media. We emailed lots of people, including agents and members and, people who had used us, to advise them that we'd got a consultation out. We extended the period more than it should have been. So we went from 4 weeks to 6 weeks to give people sufficient time, recognising it was over a holiday period. So we were surprised at the low number. We did an online, so you could either fill in an online response, or you could send it via email, or you could send it via post. So we offered lots of alternatives for people to put in their comments. The comments that we did have, we found, were either not, they were about specific cases rather than the policy itself, and there were some in support and some that were observations. So, what I think is important to understand is that we did give people that opportunity, and we did make sure that was proactively promoted, that there was an opportunity to give feedback. So I'm hoping it's a reflection that the policy does what it needs to do. So so it's a really positive in some ways. In respect of the protected characteristics, we have to be mindful of data, and we have to follow the GDPR guidelines in respect of that. I'm not aware of us collecting any data on protective characteristics for people who have either reported cases or of where they think enforcement action should be taken, or about the people who are the subject of those potential enforcement cases. So that is something I would have to take back to see whether there is something that we could do around that to ensure that we're collecting the data if it's appropriate to collect it, and what value that would give us. I don't know if that's answered your questions, but thank you.
Stephen, can you?
Yeah, if I just to add to a couple of points and build upon what Heather's outlined, and I think to offer reassurance, Appendix A of the report lists all of those areas of planning enforcement, planning-related enforcement, and just to reassure, I think it was Councillor Davis that had asked the questions, on whose behalf you're asking the question. That's a comprehensive list of every provision under the Town and Country Planning Acts that applies to planning enforcement. And in fact, looking through them and on the back of both the consequences, so we've used both proceeds of crime and prosecutions in the courts, and the range of, on pages 29 to 31, the range of powers. I think the only one that I can recall that we haven't used in the enforcement teams, former enforcement teams, and therefore which form part of our armoury, are section 224, which is the concealment of a breach of planning permission, because there's a relatively recent provision. On the point around the suggestion of systemic racism in the planning process, obviously our process is most certainly not designed to disadvantage any particular community, and obviously you can see there's an attached inequalities impact assessment that has been done, indicating the kind of consideration that we've given in the delivery of the policy. Heather's highlighted it is incredibly difficult to consistently collect data on protected characteristics, even looking at other authorities and how they approach this in the enforcement realm, because there's a degree of sensitivity both to from the complainant and from those who are the subject of our investigations. But we will try and see whether there's a way that we can introduce some form of monitoring. We certainly don't do that at this moment in time, but it's not because we haven't considered it, it's because we haven't resolved a way of sensitively collecting through, because of the nature of the online reporting that people have, and already concerns that we're aware of people giving their name and address even in terms of the process of making a complaint. Likewise, we do tend to follow quite a consistent protocol when it comes to dealing with the Gypsy and Traveller community and those who are settled from that community in each case. I just want to offer some reassurance from a planning perspective. It is most certainly a material planning consideration, and therefore it's something that we've consistently had regard to. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Scott.
Thank you, and thank you for a comprehensive report. Now, I'm just noting that one of the aims is, there's an emphasis on early intervention and compliance. Now, I think I would not be speaking out of turn as a local councillor to say that we do receive quite a number of concerns from residents about lack of enforcement. And I represent West Chesterton, and I won't name details, but I know of one where the planning permission included the return of trees to a street, and the trees have not been returned, and there's been no enforcement action. And another one where there was a student building and therefore supposedly no cars, but that did not turn out to be the case. And again, there was my former fellow councillor, the former councillor Mark Sargent, had a great deal to do with that, and I know he was in despair. And then the third one is where an application for enforcement was put in and responded to in November 2022, and then another application was put in and has not been responded to as yet. And so those residents have been in touch with me and my fellow councillors, concerned about the failure of response. So I come to the emphasis on early intervention and compliance. I know that there can't be any appeal if a decision is made not to enforce, but is there anything in this proposal that we can really firmly rely upon that will mean that there is early intervention and that there are timely responses to requests from residents as to planning enforcement? And I need to say that in each of these instances, the residents were on the ball. They did know what planning permission had been granted, or in the third case, not granted, and therefore their applications in relation to enforcement were germane and well-founded. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So in respect of the specific cases that you refer to, obviously we would have to look into them to understand. I think you talked about one was responded to back in November, but a subsequent one hasn't been. So I'd need to have the details to understand that. That shouldn't happen with the new system that we have now. When you use the online form, it effectively goes straight into our back office system and creates a case, and then it's allocated to an officer to deal with, and they should then be responding on a timely basis. So I don't know whether that's a problem with our system, and I would need to check in that, or whether it's an in-between stage whilst we've been implementing all of our new processes. In respect of the planning, if the decision has been made and the case officers have reviewed everything and have come to the conclusion that it's not expedient to undertake enforcement, then that's the decision that's been made. It is a discretionary service, so that means it is up to your discretion or the council's discretion whether action is taken or not. Unless there's new or further information that comes in, then we wouldn't review that. And I think in respect of the early intervention, this is something that we want to achieve. So where we have high numbers of cases that are going to enforcement, and that might, that is showing us a pattern, then what we want to be able to do is to work with, and it might be in a certain area, we want to work with the developer or the area or the residents to understand that, and then proactively try and ensure that we're getting messages out there, or we're getting, that understanding out there, so that we don't get to a point where we need to take enforcement action. And that's the work in progress. That's where we're heading towards, and that's where we want to be. And this compliance policy will hopefully help us to achieve that.
Stephen would like to just add to Heather's response and then come back in, please.
I think just to build on Heather's point, at the top of page, bottom of page 25 and top of page 26, what we are trying to do is to move to a more deliberate, picking up on your point, Councillor Scott, around perceptions of delay. I think what we're trying to signal is that where breaches of planning control happen for a whole series of reasons. Sometimes they're accidental, or a householder has entrusted their builder to do some work on their part, for example, and the builder's not followed the plans. What we're starting to try and signal, and Heather's comments about early intervention are, if when we are made aware of a breach of planning control, we get a engagement from the person whose property is not in accordance with the planning permission, then the objective is that we're constructive and we seek to try and work with them, because often the fastest way to resolution is with consent rather than through using the formal notices. But where we have a sense, and what the policy is trying to signal, is that where we have a sense that people are either trying to be deliberately frustrate that process of securing compliance, or indeed where, despite our approaches, those responsible for breaches of planning control simply do not engage, then the service wants to be able to move more quickly to formal action, quite on behalf of the community at large, so that the obfuscation or protracted delay that residents sometimes have experienced through people gaming the system can't happen. So the policy is, as Heather has highlighted, part of a step in the right direction around that journey, and we expect to try and signal that through our messaging going forward, through the website and so forth. So if you engage, if it's a deliberate, if it's an accidental error, and people engage constructively with the shared planning service, then we would look to work with those parties to try and resolve the matter expediently. If people obstruct or don't participate or engage with the planning service when we identify a breach of control, then we will more rapidly move to the formal processes, which include notices, potential prosecution, conviction, and so forth. Because in the absence of a party to engage with, that's what residents, we believe, would expect us to do.
So, Scott, did you want to come back?
Just back, I do accept and note that, as it's stated at paragraph 6.10, that enforcement cases can be a lengthy and complex process, and therefore I was going to ask, could some time frame be set so that officers know that they need to work to a particular time frame, say in terms of responding to applications and in terms of actually, then going to the party whose property is being complained about, etc. Because if there were timelines drawn in, that would be helpful to the public to know that timelines were actually being followed, because again, I realise that, of course, one can't hear comment on specific cases, but I am thinking about the trees, 5 trees, and it would seem to me that if a planning application said that the developer was required to replace 5 trees, then it's not very difficult, really, to follow that one up. And it would be one I would have thought that no decision could be made, that compliance was not going to be required. So I am just thinking about timeframes, whether that is possible, or whether, because the cases are different, it might not be.
Perhaps Heather can cover this point. Heather, we have got service standards.
Yeah. Well, do you want to take? You can take it then. That's fine.
Okay, page 23 of the report, we are trying to, for the first time, define some of those, picking up on Councillor Scott's comments, some of those service standards. So 5 working days for receipt of high priority cases. We're looking to identify responses. Quite clearly, the response, if it's no response from a third party or if it's engagement, will then have its own timeline. It's worth also highlighting to members that in a consultation the government that's currently live with government about changes to planning fees, the government are also suggesting that there will be some performance measures nationally set for planning enforcement, and they're inviting comments from authorities around that. So our current standards are those that we've set out in this policy, which will be massively helped if people use the online reporting process, because the clock can start through that system and help us to monitor and indeed report back to you on how we're doing against those. But they may well change as a result of national direction, and obviously we'd come back to you and adjust. I suspect it's probably not cost efficient to collect 2 separate standard responses, but page 23 and page 24, you'll see we've assigned 5, 10 and 20 day response times in terms of at least initiating the investigation and helping people to understand what we're doing to those high, medium and low priority cases.
Okay. Councillor Swift.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to add to what Councillor Scott was saying. There is a perception, I don't know if it's real or just a perception, that big building operations like the big hotel at the end of my road, they get planning permission to, on the understanding that they'll plant 5 trees and build an underground gym and have 5 affordable houses. And what you actually get, no gym, no affordable housing, it's just Bentleys outside private hire, townhouses, no trees and no communication. So I just would like to ask about retrospective action and what's the sort of situation for compliance when planning applications are not fulfilled by big multinational corporations.
Well, I think a specific case, Councillor Swift, is probably best discussed outside the chamber. Thank you. Perhaps if Heather's still there, Heather, could you explain to members of the committee how members of the public can look up progress with or the situation with any particular enforcement activity? Because I think this is a key concern for people, that they know there's a problem, but they don't hear anything back from the council about it, often for obvious reasons, because of the discussions that have been going on. But there's going to be a reporting mechanism, is that right, for people to see on the portal? Could you explain that, please?
Yeah, so on the planning portal, and I think we've included a link in the document, we're working our way through, so all current applications that we receive or notifications of potential breaches should be on the portal, and then what we're doing as well is we're going back for a period of years to put historical data on there as well, and that's work in progress, because obviously that data was available previously but only on spreadsheets on both of the separate City Council website and South Cam's website. The other thing that we're working on at the moment is our automatic updates. So we do have you should get an automatic response when you submit your online compliance problem. And then you should get an allocated officer, so you should get an email that triggers that. And what we're building into that process is a review, so that you will get a notification if we've done anything or after a certain period of time, so that you don't have to contact us. We're pushing it out to members of the public, if that makes sense. So that's all work in progress that we're doing with our system. and hopefully that will help. The other thing that you can do is sign up to get reports as well. So on the portal, you should be able to sign up and ask for reports to be sent to you through an email address. And if anybody wants any specific training or anything on that, we can provide that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I think if anybody's got any doubt about the effectiveness of this council's transformation programme, then they could do well to investigate what's been going on with this compliance service, because it's been comprehensive and the report doesn't really thoroughly describe the scope and extent of the modernisation and digitalisation that's been going on in this service. So I'd like to thank you, Heather, and all your fellow team members for conducting this basically top-to-tail review of the service, and we'll see the results of that coming through, and the members of the public will see that as well. So thank you. I just want now to, if we can, move to the vote. That's on page 3 of the agenda. The recommendation is the Executive Council is recommended to adopt the unified Greater Cambridgeshire Planning Compliance Policy. Could all those in favour please raise your hand? Those of you who are present for the whole thing, I think. Is that correct? Yeah, I think that's probably the right thing to do. Thank you. So that's unanimous. The Executive Council agree with the recommendation?
I do. I'd also like to say that, again, thank the Heather and the team for all the hard work, and I think it will make a difference. I also like to say the considerate contractor scheme that is, we hope contractors will sign up to. That is a very good way to help residents work with contractors at an early stage, particularly large schemes. So we encourage that, and ward councillors raising issues early again is very, very helpful, because if we can get them dealt with early, it normally can sort things out, makes a big difference. And finally, I think the compliance reports coming to the planning committees for updates is also very useful. So thank you very much. Thank you, councillors.
I can apologise for being late. I've been at that other great seat of democracy, Alconbury, where the transport is very limited. And I need to declare that I'm a member of CAM's cycling campaign.
Next job was to welcome. Could you just introduce yourself?
Oh, hello, I'm Councillor Dinah Pounds, and I'm standing in for Councillor Herbert this evening.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bagent has announced himself too and declared an interest as a member of the Cambridge Cycling Campaign. So, welcome to the committee this evening. Thank you. You move to agenda item 6 on page 41 of your agenda papers. This is the update on the Greater Cambridge Partnership infrastructure projects. The Delivery Manager Strategic Sites, Philippa Kelly, will present the report. Could I remind members that you should have received an updated version of the report, either by hand or hard copy, and this is available to view online in the agenda pack. So, Philippa, could you please begin?
Good evening, everybody. I'm just going to start my slideshow. Bear with me one moment. Okay, Chair, could you just confirm that you can see my slideshow, please?
We can, thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. So I'm here to provide a briefing to members of this committee on the main GCP infrastructure access corridor projects, which the Director for Planning and Economic Development has delegation for. And this enables an opportunity for members to express their views to officers in respect of these projects. So there are 5 public transport projects which are covered by the delegation: the Camborne to Cambridge Rapid Transport Route, the C2C, the Cambridge South East Transport Route, CSET, Cambridge Eastern Access, the Waterbeach to Cambridge route and Greater Cambridge Greenways. Most of these corridor projects will follow the Transport and Works Act order for consent, and as a promoter of them, the County Council will apply to the Secretary of State for Transport for a Transport and Works Act order on behalf of GCP. The application will be processed by the Department for Transport's Infrastructure Planning Unit, who will also issue any decision on applications made under the Transport and Works Act order on behalf of the Secretary of State. I've summarised here the main stages of the formal TWA process, noting that the Council would have an opportunity to be involved through either the submission of an objection or a representation. And if an objection is submitted on behalf of the Council, the local authority becomes a statutory objector with specific rights. And if that objection is taken to public inquiry, then the local authority would be required to submit a statement of case, and that would set out the issues that are presented at the public inquiry. If the order is made and deemed planning permission granted, the Greater Cambridge Councils would take responsibility for discharging any planning conditions relevant within their administrative area. So I've just summarised here the role of the Shared Planning Service to date with regard to in general terms, the projects. We have involvement at the pre-submission stage of the Transport and Works Act order, engagement on details in respect of that particular submission. We provide technical input into specific issues, and also officers become involved in reviewing information and draft documentation, which will ultimately be contained in the Transport and Works Act order submission. And then the Shared Planning Service would also have involvement at the application stage. It would coordinate the role on behalf of the planning authority, the submission of the objection or the representation. And then it would also compile the statement of case if the local planning authority wants to take that objection further, and also become involved in the public inquiry in due course as well. I'm going to now take the opportunity to look in more detail at those specific projects and their associated programmes. The first of that is the Camborne to Cambridge Rapid Transport route. As many of you will be aware, this scheme is already at the advanced pre-application stage. You'll be also aware from today's meeting of the Cambridgeshire County Council Full Council that the council unanimously agreed to proceed with the formal submission of the Transport and Works Act order for the C2C route, and I believe that was a unanimous decision there. So officers have already been involved within the Shared Planning Service in engagement with the GCP over the last year in providing advice and technical input in respect of this project. And we envisage that that role will continue as the application goes forward for the Transport and Works Act order. Based on the indicative programme for this project, as set out in your report, it's anticipated that the final order will be submitted within the next few months. Moving on now to phase 2 of the Cambridge South East Transport route. This is the new busway from the Cambridge Biomedical Campus along the A1307 corridor to Haverhill. This is currently at the early pre-application stage. Officers of the service would be looking to engage in more detail once there's more certainty around the project programme. I've just provided a project overview on this slide, which also shows the proposed new travel hub site off the A11 here. The Cambridge Eastern Access project, now this is slightly different because this project won't follow the conventional Transport and Works Act order approach. The improvements to Newmarket Road, which are incorporated into the phase 1 of this project, will fall under permitted development, whilst the relocation of the Newmarket Road Park and Ride site would fall under the County Council's responsibility. There's currently a consultation by GCP on the phase 1 proposals. Actually, I believe that ended yesterday, and I've just shown one part of the project on this slide. These are preliminary design proposals between the Leper Chapel to Airport Way roundabout. I also have an overhead to show the park and ride site relocation options. Officers have been in active engagement with GCP over the last few months regarding the park and ride site relocation, but it's an expectation we will have further discussions as the project advances. This slide shows the park and ride search area, with the preferred site shown as P1 adjacent the Airport Way roundabout. Turning now to the Waterbeach to Cambridge corridor project. This is currently subject to a live consultation until the end of this week. The consultation is seeking feedback in respect of route options for the Waterbeach to Cambridge busway and associated active travel improvements, and also options for a new park and ride site near to Waterbeach. It's understood that the results of that consultation will go back to the GCP Executive Board later this year, where they will recommend a preferred route option alongside a preferred park and ride site location. And again, shared service planning officers are expecting to input more into this project once there's more certainty around the programme. This just shows the different options, the route options for the Waterbeach to Cambridge route, which are currently under consultation at the moment. And then here, the park and ride site options are shown here as A, B, C, the alternatives on this overhead here. And then finally, turning to the Greater Cambridge Greenways project, this is proposing a network of 12 greenways feeding into Cambridge and linking up with other city projects such as the Chisholm Trail. The projects are at various different stages, with public engagement currently live on the Swaffham and Bottisham greenways, which will end later this week. The majority of work relating to the greenways projects will be permitted development and will not require planning permission, but any planning applications that are required will be submitted to the County Council with the Shared Planning Service as a consultee. Officers from the Shared Planning Service have provided technical advice in respect of a number of issues in respect of this project, and we're expecting that engagement to continue as work progresses on the wider Greenways projects. So just to sum up, this report is to note, but obviously any observations in respect of the respective projects that I've referred to this evening will be taken away and reported back to GCP in due course. I'll now end my slideshow. Thank you very much.
I know Councillor Copley wants to ask questions. Anybody else? Councillor Copley, do you want to fire away?
Thank you, Councillor Smith. May I actually split what I say in two, the first being Councillor Davies for clarity. So the points from Councillor Sam Davies are as follows. General comment being that it's a very legalistic document, but what she's interested in is dates of delivery. Specifically, given that the transport interventions are supposed to be supporting massive development, that's the key milestone that Councillor Davies is interested in. The second are three specific points from Councillor Davies. The first is with respect to point 4.6, which reads, GCSP planning policy, strategy and economic team has also been involved in the strategic level policy discussions with GCP, most notably in relation to Greenbelt and open space recreation policy and assessments. Councillor Davies' question is, can they tell us anything more about the detail of this? Or can you, apologies for using the wrong words. The second point relates to point 4.11, which reads, whilst GCSP officers have had some historic dialogue with GCP in respect of this project, to date this has been limited. The question is, why has the engagement been limited so far? And the final question from Councillor Davies is in respect to point 4.26, which reads, the GCSP Strategic Sites team is expecting to provide input on the TWAO pre-application process for the Waterbeach to Cambridge project later this year, once more certainty about the TWA order programme is known. The question is, how does this timetable, or the lack of it, match up against delivery of Waterbeach Newtown? So maybe I could pause there and then speak again in a minute.
Okay, so if I can come back and then answer as the questions as hopefully as I recollect them. So I think we are very much guided as a shared planning service on the project programs that are given to us by GCP, and as I previously referred in my presentation, the projects are all at different various stages. The dialogue that we have at pre-application stage is not publicly available. It's sort of technical advice with our officers that is informing the various elements of the documents that GCP are compiling. But I note the point about questions regarding I think was the Greenbelt policy considerations, open space recreation policy. These were sort of local plan policy questions that had been raised during the course of those discussions, which had involved officers with the from the local plans team of the shared planning service. And that's just, it's work in progress, and we are still having those discussions with regard to those particular elements. They're continuing these dialogues. Just trying to recollect the other questions that were being raised. The delivery of Waterbeach and how that particular project ties in with the overall delivery of Waterbeach Newtown. I don't have the precise delivery dates before me. I don't know whether Stephen, off the top of his head, is able to advise further, but we can certainly look into that, and I'd have to come back with regard to that particular point, I'm afraid.
Chair, yeah, just to build on Philippa's comments, I think the Shared Planning Service has given some advice around interpretation of policy in some respects and clarification and shared understanding of what Greenbelt policy says in the context of Greater Cambridge, and also, for example, we've highlighted and signposted information around things like our Greenbelt assessments, the landscape and visual impact assessment work that was done, and the evidence base that sits underneath the current adopted local plan, which is of course pertinent to the consideration of the impacts and effects of schemes. And so we've aimed to support and assist the GCP in understanding all of the evidence rather than necessarily significantly directed their work. Clearly, we need to, on your behalf as councils, make sure that our position is still available to be formed based on the evidence that comes in at the time of each of the applications. But we've sought to assist because we hold a substantial body of existing evidence, including landscape and visual impact appraisals locally. In terms of the point, I think you asked a question, I'm not sure, Philippa, whether you covered that, about why has the engagement been limited to date on CSETs. I think clearly that scheme has gone through a number of iterations, and GCP have not fully settled on a final scheme. They've consulted upon an alternative alignment relatively recently as a kind of adjustment following a planning decision made by a planning inspector not too long ago. As the project matures in terms of its form and detail, we would expect, as I said, highlighting the evidence that we have already prepared as part of our ongoing work around the local plan, or indeed previously prepared, to share and then try and ensure that GCP have regard to all of that information. So we would expect to see that intensifying. In terms of the Waterbeach corridor work and the current consultation, those will be familiar with the Waterbeach Planning Permission will know that there is a phase one series of interventions that are required to happen before, I think the figure is around 1,600 dwellings on that site have been completed. Clearly they're quite a way off at this moment in time, because until you have a substantive number of residents, the trip effects and the transport mitigations aren't necessarily required immediately. For those familiar with the project, Will note, however, that some of the works have already been completed, notably the cycleway enhancements along the A10, which is one component of the mitigation proposals that have come forward. But we're not aware that they're in breach of the obligations associated with the delivery of that programme. And I think the Water Beach consultation that is now out is in a timely way consistent with delivery of the limitations in the Planning Permission.
Councillor Copley, have you got any further questions?
It's more of a statement than a question, but Stephen Kelly encouraged as many views raised with me or of my own to be shared as possible. So I'll just comment on each of the schemes in the order that they come up in the agenda. So the first of those is the Camborne to Cambridge Rapid Transport Route, or CTC, public transport corridor. To share the Cambridge Green Party view on the Cambridge to Camborne busway, we continue to oppose the plans for a significant off-road section for the following reasons. That a less damaging and effective alternative had been worked out and presented to the GCP by Cambridge past, present and future. Camborne to Cambridge in highway proposals for the high quality public transport scheme, February 2021. And therefore we asked the GCP to adopt these proposals. The project with significant off-road sections has high embedded carbon costs. I think there's a range of views over whether, to what extent we should build new infrastructure which will deliver lower carbon transport. It depends exactly how much development we will or will not have in the area. All development in the area is predicated on sufficient water supply being available, and as yet we don't have a good short-term solution for delivering that. So particular types of vehicle, i.e. trains or such like, obviously cannot be transported on any other kind of infrastructure, but buses can. Further views of Cambridge Green Party are that the CTC would destroy precious greenbelt land and that the orchard has significant biodiversity value and is threatened as part of the proposal. Another point is that the project has got significant opposition by residents of Cambridgeshire and doesn't have a direct democratic mandate. And then a further final comment from me, which was that if the busway were to proceed, then lessons need to be learned from the busways that we already have, as the repairs have been extremely expensive in terms of millions of pounds of local taxes, and the design has been shown to have safety flaws and service issues, and also that sections of busways in and around Cambridge have been out of action for significant periods of time because of said safety issues. You requested I comment on each in turn.
Yeah, you want to go through the whole lot?
If that's okay.
If you could go at speed, please.
Yeah. So the second item is Cambridge South East Transport Route, public transport corridor. So the Cambridge Green Party view is to support the campaign to reinstate a rail link between Cambridge and Haverhill, and disappointment that that option was rejected at an early stage of planning. Support for proposed investment in public transport, cycling and walking in the area, but similar concerns to the previous busway regarding environmental impact, embedded carbon, value for money compared to busways travelling on existing infrastructure. Specifically about the travel hub, we support the model proposed by Smarter Cambridge Transport, i.e. bus, tram or train station with more than the basic facilities of a bus stop, with the dominant modes of access being walking and cycling, which is quite a different model to that described, which has ongoing reliance on private car use. The next item is Cambridge Eastern Access Public Transport Corridor. The major changes to this are the road along its journey and the two junctions, both of which are proposed as Cyclops junctions, which I strongly support for both and think will be much more inclusive piece of infrastructure, specifically mobility scooter users can get trapped in the Elizabeth Way underpass because it's a very steep ramp which prevents them from being able to get out, and manual wheelchair users and cargo bike users also report similarly. And the current infrastructure has personal safety concerns, particularly for women. I would comment that the proposal as exactly doesn't fulfil LTN 120 throughout its length of the road. So there are sections where the cycle path is too narrow. I strongly support in general the floating bus stops, which is most bus stops on the road, but there are at least 2 which are not floating bus stops outside Cambridge United. And I don't think that cyclists should have this much more unsafe infrastructure at this spot. I'll also just comment that quite a few residents have raised issues with some of the pedestrian crossings which are currently there being removed, and are concerned that the new crossings are not sufficiently close together to prevent people making unsafe crossings of the road. Specifically, the crossing outside Jack Warren Green is an example of that. I'll just briefly mention for the Cyclops junction proposed for Barmore Roundabout that there's a lot of problems with antisocial driving and queuing around the McDonald's drive-through. There is, as I understand, no way to make the McDonald's non-drive-through, which is the primary request of residents. But the new design should be sure to mean that queues for McDonald's drive-through do not result in standstill traffic. Finally, comments about the implementation of the proposal and trees along Newmarket Road. Residents along other improved transport corridors have complained about the activities of contractors, and there's been a concern about the contractors' activities as they implement the GCP's proposal. And there are certain trees which are very magnificent, and I've been advised by the GCP will be saved if at all possible unless accidental damage is done to them. So I request that when the most magnificent of these trees are having work done immediately near, that this is very well supervised to prevent this accidental damage from happening. And finally, the proposed relocation of the park and ride appears to be put on Greenbelt with every iteration of its design. Of all the proposed locations, I agree with the GCP's conclusion about which is the best one, but I would put it that a brownfield site would be better than a Greenbelt site, which none of these options are put as. Waterbeach to Cambridge Public Transport Corridor Project. So the 2 routes do avoid the need for house demolition that was very unpopular previously. But a detailed options appraisal was also carried out by Atkins since the first consultation. The Green Party was opposed to the initial proposal for a busway and suggested that other transport improvements should be implemented to meet the demand from Waterbeach Newtown. And Atkins, in their option appraisal, also state that these other quick wins and complementary schemes should be progressed, which include the Mereway active travel route, the Waterbeach Greenway, the A10 cycle route, and improved bus and rail timetable coordination and capacity. As with all the busways, there's a very large cost associated with it, and responses to the first consultation showed the majority felt it would have a negative environmental impact. So it's not clear that there's been due consideration of all the other non-busway options, and therefore the local Green Party remains opposed to this development and would support the progression of other options. Finally and briefly...
Councillor Smart.
Sorry to interrupt, everyone. I'm not used to political parties being sort of brought up so often in scrutiny committee meetings. I'm a bit confused. What does the Green Party mean? Does that mean the National Green Party, the local Green Party? Does it mean all of the members of the Green Party in Cambridge or Cambridgeshire? I know the councillor speaks for herself, but I'm not quite sure who else she's expecting to speak for. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Coppey, do you want to answer that question?
Thank you, Councillor Smart, for your question. I'm going by the encouragement of Stephen Kelly, who asked for as many views to be shared, either my view, views shared with me, etc., or any concerns or views I have. So I'm speaking for myself, but I'm referencing the expertise of members of my party.
Just actually wondering whether this is the right place to be making all of these comments. Mr. Pagent.
Yeah, I was going to make the same point. I mean, I'm not going to say with all due respect, because I do mean that, but I always think it sounds a bit insincere. The Cambridge to Camborne Greenway has been approved to go a Transport and Work Act, so that's sort of done at the moment. There's been lots of opportunity for people to raise things. This is not, I would have thought, the place to be raising things. It may be that Stephen Kelly would like to hear from people about what should be bought, about thoughts on these things, but the proper place for these to be raised would be at the Greater Cambridge Partnership. The Newmarket Road, for example, has just finished the consultation, so nothing's been set in stone on that, and nor on the others. It does seem a bit like electioneering to me, about saying, well, we said this and we said that, like leaflet writing, as we often talk about other parties as doing. Surely this isn't the forum for this debate. The debate on this is a Greater Cambridge Partnership and, if so you wanted, the County Council.
Stephen Kelly.
Just, I think, I'm sorry if there's been some misunderstanding. So effectively, when we brought the report to you to seek authorisation for delegation, there was a widespread aspiration that because effectively officers will be representing this council, not GCP or others, but representing this council in a statutory process, that what members wanted was an opportunity to share their concerns so that me and my officers could take on board those concerns in that process. And I think to be fair to Councillor Copley, she did seek my advice on this, what we have encouraged and what we've tried to do through this report is to encourage people to share their views so that as we on your behalf make representations through those stages that we won't be able to bring in front of you, we're at least mindful of those factors or those matters that are vexing individually or collectively members of the committee. So we had the session last time around the water treatment works and Cambridge South Station, and today is around GCP. You're quite right, Councillor Bajan. The County Council considered C2C proposals today to proceed to TWA, but we will, as a City Council, have to make representations into that Transport and Works Act process as a consultee in the process. And selfishly, whilst it's helpful to hear people's views, partly so that we can try and capture and represent those on your behalf at those stages where you're, as members of the council, are not going to be asked for your input because of the timescale limitations and so on that lead to the delegation. So, Chair,
yes, I mean, the scope and extent of the comments that have been made by Councillor Copley go back years in the formation of these proposals, which are now extremely advanced. And we're not in a position where we can comments made at this point unpicking the whole of the scheme. This is, the GCP have heard all of these comments before. They have thoroughly examined them. They were then, the examinations and the findings of those assessments were objected to yet again by the objectors. And the GCP then appointed an independent audit, and the audit more or less endorsed the GCP's proposals. I'm speaking particularly of C2C in this context. And yet again, the objectors objected to the independent assessment. So it just goes on. So eventually you do have to come to a point where you actually make a decision and you proceed with the scheme, and that's where we're at in respect of that. So are you, Councillor, yes?
See, the difficulty being, yes, it's all old hat. We've heard it all before. But this can't be a position. If Councillor Copley's bringing this as a position, we need to have a vote on it. You know, input is one thing, and I would have felt that was better dealt with at an officer briefing, not in a formal committee. Otherwise, what Councillor Copley is saying could be taken as the view of this council. This is.
If I can just clarify, because this council's view will be formed formally by this committee and through the normal arrangements through your lead member for planning. So the council's formal position at the point of consultation will be formed through that process with this meeting. What we were asked to do was to hear voices as officers, provide a forum in this space to hear the voices of members, so that in the lead up to that process and in understanding the range of different views, as you rightly say, there are a wide range of views around these pieces of infrastructure, officers could take a considered view as we move forward. It's most certainly not a question of solely hearing Councillor Copley's comments will drive the shared planning services advice to you, but I think there was a request for a forum like this to hear a range of different views that we as officers could take away and at least understand when we came back to present a formal view to you, we could either address or respond to those particular points of concern so that members didn't feel shortchanged by the delegation process.
Well, yes, I think that's all very well, Stephen, but my understanding of it was that you'd come to us with details of the proposals and the issues that you'd identified through your joint work with the GCP, and then you would brief us on those, and then you'd elicit the comments of the Scrutiny Committee on them, not to hear a sort of root and branch critique of the entire model and of each scheme as it's been evolved. That's absolutely not what we're wanting. So that's it. Okay. As we haven't had any briefings on the greenways, I don't think really the committee can hear any more comments on it. Thank you, Councillor Copley. Councillor Smart.
Well, I mean, since there's been a lot of criticism, I'll just put it balance in. I mean, all four of the first ones have the word public transport in them, and that's just what we need, public transport to, avert this climate crisis that's coming at us day by day. It's probably the most important thing we can do as a council, I think, is to help to alleviate that problem as much as we can and to get people out their cars, onto buses and whatever else. And not to miss out 5, the greenways. It has a special place in my heart as the lead councillor for cycling. Probably a lot of people haven't even heard of them, but they will be so useful to people to be able, I mean, when they were first thought of, it was about cycling and possibly even electric bicycles, but things have moved on already. But certainly, and even horse will be using horses on them, I think, some of them. But anyway, it's mostly for walking and cycling, I guess. And that's going to be fantastic for getting to work, getting to play, going on picnics, whatever else you want to do. And, getting into the city or out of the city, those are fantastic things. And the whole set of GCP projects are all fantastic. They're all aiming in the right direction. And I completely support the whole set of them.
Thank you, Councillor Smart. I have to endorse everything you've just said. I think the people of Greater Cambridge are remarkably privileged by the city deal and the enormous amount of money that the government is going to invest in this green infrastructure. Very few places in the rest of the country are getting this kind of treatment, and we should be celebrating and welcoming it.
Thank you, Chair. I did just want to say that I think it needs to be made really clear to Mr. Kelly that we really appreciate the position that he was stating, namely that the officers have to work with expediency, and they're going to be in a position on some of these projects where they haven't heard formally from the council. And what I understand is being said is that they're being diligent officers and officers who are recognising that they represent Cambridge City Council, and that we as councillors are the group from whom the officers need to be hearing in order to go forward confidently in what they're saying. And I did hear Mr. Kelly use the word forum, and so it seems to me that we do need to be establishing fora where we can come together and give some direction to the officers as to what our position is. But I don't think that that the Scrutiny Committee is that forum. But we do need, I think, to assist the officers as much as we can. But if I could just move to a different point that I did want to make about all these projects, often pedestrians are really overlooked. And I've been sitting here thinking, could we actually make some representation? I'm not asking for a motion, I'm just suggesting this. Some representation to the Greater Cambridge Partnership that they make real efforts to consult with pedestrians. I know that within Cambridge City there have been several efforts to establish pedestrian representatives or organisations, just as there's been a really strong effort by some, and one resident in particular I can think of, to set up a bus representative group. But so just two things that I wanted to emphasise: the vital importance of taking into account pedestrians. We've got really good cam cycle representation. I think that the cars don't really need any representation. They seem to make their own representation by the fact of being on the roads. But you see, each of these projects that relates to a corridor or a highway or a roadway will all have, at least along some part of their distance, situations where pedestrians need to be catered for. And I want to strongly say that the pedestrian ways should not be dual use, that there needs to be a really clear representation that there need to be cycleways and there need to be footways, because we can't have situations where there are dangers for pedestrians and there are dangers for cyclists because they're on the same path. And it needs also to be made very clear, if there is going to be any shared use, what is shared use? There needs to be clear signage, and if the painting on the footpath wears out, there has to be a team that comes out immediately and repairs that the signage on the footpaths. But I do, as I say, to sum up, could the Greater Cambridge Partnership make real efforts to consult with pedestrians, and then no shared use unless it's absolutely no other option, and where there is going to be shared use in any of these projects, which in my view there shouldn't be, there has to be absolutely clear signage, both signage, erected signage and footpath signage that has a budget to repair it immediately it becomes invisible or just wearing out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. I have to say I strongly support what you've just said about pedestrians. There is an organisation called Living Streets, but it doesn't quite have the same heft as Cam Cycle, when I think you're right, it should have. I think the other point that you made about the separation of cycleways and footpaths, I think perhaps what passed as acceptable even as little as 5 years ago is now out of date, because just the sheer volume of people now who are walking and cycling using dual-use routes, plus the introduction of the electric cycles and the cargo bikes and all the rest of it, they're positive developments, but at the same time they do create a bit of conflict, and therefore we really do need to embed in our local plan much wider dual-use routes that are clearly segregated. And Eddington is the best example we've got in the city. 5 metres wide, 3 metres for the cycle, 2 metres for the pedestrians, no conflicts, the right standard, that's the hallmark standard for what we want to see in the city. Now, we've debated this at the GCP Joint Assembly recently about what width these footways will be. And of course, this is a standard that can be very difficult to attain on the, in the outer reaches of these footways. So we have to be pragmatic about how wide they can be in places. But I strongly agree with what you have to say, because if we want to get people out the car into active, healthy modes of transport, then we have to make these routes safe for people. And that's got to be a key goal. And I think if we're going to get a message from this scrutiny committee today to the officers, that's the one I want to hit home. So thank you very much for your comments. Very much appreciated. Councillor Swift.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I'd agree with what Councillor Scott and you have just said. I cycle every day and walk every evening 10,000 steps. And usually we get nearly sort of run over by a bicycle on the evening walk along the river. I just wondered if it's not possible to have segregated cycle and pedestrian footways, whether you could have the own signage to say that cyclists should give way to pedestrians, just as an interim until that separate path can be.
So patient.
Chair, can I reassure members that the GCP is aware and does hear from pedestrian groups in the same way as it hears from CamCycle. Pedestrian groups are becoming better organised and they will become more important. I think this shared use thing is a real difficulty. No doubt the zealots would build a separate use thing along the river. But we'd want to take 5 metres. And you can't do that. Not practically, we have to be practical. So we have to share. Now, I appreciate about the signage, but signage again is a sort of graffiti. And, you know, every cyclist knows, as every car driver knows, that you're supposed to keep to the speed limit. We can only be as good as we are. And it is a great difficulty. Just the latest consultation that's taken place on Cromwell Road, which is the next phase of the Chisholm Trail, had a shared use pathway, which has been, the local councillors and myself have intervened and stopped. They're going to have to find another way of doing it. But there is this, you know, it's like the middle of Parker's Piece, that shared use. We could make it into 2 separate routes, but you take another 10 metres. And it really, we have to compromise. Maybe if you come back in 30 years, it'll be like that. But the GCP, I promise you, is well aware about people walking because we all do that as well. Thank you. But I'm concerned about this debate in a way that this should be, if we're going to talk about this stuff, this should be a briefing and not something here where we end up challenging each other about things that we could well agree about and do agree about.
Very much. Are we all done with members' questions? So can I go to the vote then, please? It's on page 42. Not.
Sorry, I think I might have kicked this off. I didn't mean to stop Councillor Copley from speaking, and I'm very keen to hear what she's got to say. My question was just about what the Green Party was, and you did ask Councillor Copley that, but I didn't get an answer. But, you know, I'm quite happy to carry on listening, but it's up to you, Chair, of course, where we go with that. But I wouldn't want to be the sort of person that calls Councillor Copley not to be able to speak in the Scrutiny Committee.
Don't want to deny Councillor Copley a democratic right to speak. So, Councillor Copley, are you going to go through all 5 greenways in detail?
Councillor Smith, most of what I was going to say has been said by other councillors. I just wanted to add in that nobody's raised horse riding, which is another form of active transport that the greenways will, I can't remember exactly the wording, like aim or try to fulfil. Sorry? Will be accommodated. Well, I mean, obviously they won't be accommodated on all greenways along their length, but I just thought I would raise the importance of good bridleways being available so that's another form of transport that this route can take.
It's known as the equestrian question at the GCP. Councillor Smart, are you back on? What are you doing?
Sorry, what do you want? I've said my bit already. I mean, I did mention horses earlier. I don't. Maybe you never heard me mention it, Councillor Copley, but yeah, I didn't. I was aware from years ago talking about them at the then. So, yeah. I'm not a horse rider myself, though.
Councillor Bajent's been at Shire Hall all afternoon and not been able to speak, so now he's got ants in his pants and wants to carry on.
Probably I've been sitting amongst a group of 20 protesters with whistles and banners. But is horse riding ecologically sound? I don't know. I'm not even, I know that we accommodate because there's a lot of bridle ways that we're following, so it has to go that way. I'm not even sure that it's the sort of thing that we should be trying to promote. It's like promoting motor cars in 1920.
Well, I, for one, don't want to hear the Green Party position on the horses, so can we now move to the vote?
Just two things. I think horses do contribute. I mean, manure is really a vital production that horses give to the environment. But I really wanted to say, because of Mr. Kelly's desire to have feedback from us, that we don't want to be having more and more meetings, I realise that, but that if we could get notice of issues that are coming up, that there seems to be, a time frame that's a difficult time frame to deal with, we might be able to come together and provide information so that the officers can be more secure when they go.
So I think, Councillor Scott, the officers have explained to us that they're working with, and sometimes with very narrow timetables, very narrow windows. And what we've made clear is that, and what the officers accepted is they're going to make their best endeavours to brief us when things come up that they need to take soundings. They are operating within delegated powers, but it was agreed, it was an all-party agreement that we should try and have some degree of oversight where that was practical and possible. And that was an undertaking that we agreed. So, about the fourth attempt, can we now move to the recommendation, please?
It's a note, though, isn't it?
This is on page 42 of your agenda paper. The Executive Council has recommended to note this update report in respect to the GCP projects identified in criteria 1 to 5 of paragraph 1.3 above. All in favour, please raise your hands.
Chair, point of order. It's not a vote, is it? It's a note item.
It is for note, but I'm advised we can take a vote.
Just to ask members if they may.
Yeah. You're voting to note. Can you just comply, Councillor Smart?
I do apologise, Chair. I am very sorry. I will be better going forward.
All right. Is anybody going to put their hands up? Thank you very much. Is Council minded to agree the recommendation?
I've noted the discussion and the indications. Thank you.
Very much, and thank you for your presentation. Very much appreciated. Thank you. Okay, so Mr. Smart.
I'm very sorry, Chair, but I'm just not clear what's going on now then, because this is an item to note. And one or two councillors seem to be abstaining from noting. I mean, how can you abstain from noting? It doesn't make sense. Let's do things in a sensible fashion.
Well, it clearly made sense to the two councillors involved. Shall we just move on to agenda 7A, please, Councillor Smart? So, this item, I'm proposing to take this item en bloc and ask members to note item 7A, B and C, unless there are any objections. Item 7C was emailed to members separately after the agenda had been published. Are there any objections? In which case then, I ask the committee to note these items. Now, before the meeting's concluded, I would like to ask the Joint Director for Planning and Economic Development is able to provide an update on Cambridge Water's draft water resource management plan. As this item has been withdrawn from the agenda, there was insufficient time for the officers to put together a report they would be happy with. So I feel it's important to advise the committee of any developments on this issue. So, Stephen, could you now just give us a brief update on the position with that plan? Thank you.
Yeah, I can do. The document we had it on the forward plan because we were expecting it to be published in January with a period for us to review the data within it and particularly work with Cambridge Water to understand the detail behind the plan. Given the sensitivities and the significance of water, and indeed the ongoing dialogue between Cambridge Water and DEFRA, who approved the document for release, the document didn't come out until somewhere after we had anticipated it. So our consultants, Stantec, who have provided the water evidence work that sits behind the local plan, and officers have been seeking to effectively deconstruct that plan, particularly the assumptions that underpin the investment and the conclusions in order to be able to fully understand what it means for Greater Cambridge, for the city and for South Cambridgeshire, in terms of our well-known challenges around water supply particularly. We're not in a position to do that because the plan was only released relatively recently, but we are engaging actively with Cambridge Water to understand that. In parallel, though, and as a consequence of the proposals in the Cambridge Water Resource Management Plan, we are also providing, or have provided, a response to the Anglian Water Resource Management Plan, because we feel that the decisions in both of those documents, particularly the suggestion of out of district or out of area water supply enhancements, both in terms of the reservoir in the fens that's mooted in that plan and bulk water transfer, warranted a response from us, the essence of which was to seek the earliest possible delivery of that strategic infrastructure to support Greater Cambridge's current scarcity. So we are going to have to, because the significance of that document and the importance of fully understanding all of the assumptions that underpin it, we're not in a position to bring that report to you today as we had initially hoped. It's obviously absolutely essential that that we do respond to that plan on behalf of our community, and we want to do the very best that we can for that, so we will have to use the executive process for out-of-cycle decisions. Thank you.
Very much, Stephen. That now concludes.
Possibly not quite. So just in response to that, what we just heard, so Stephen, will we be able, I mean, in terms of scrutiny, will we be able to interrogate any members of the Water Authority at a meeting that report comes to, or will it just be council officers who will be talking on behalf of the Water Authority, I presume, in terms of its content?
I don't think we'll be able to bring it to a meeting for debate, in reality, given the timescales that have been set. I think the timescale is for a response in, I think it's in some point in April, and we don't have a meeting before that. The water company effectively have an open consultation, but I'm not aware that they've got any meetings or sessions or so on where the public can effectively challenge or ask them questions. I'd need to go away and check that, and I can certainly let members know if there are any local events that residents or councillors may wish to turn up to. But and from our perspective, obviously, we're not going to stand and be advocates for Cambridge Water or Staff's Water as they are. Our job is to provide a response on your behalf as the council to the water resource management proposals that are contained in that document. But from a Greater Cambridge perspective, from a City and South Cambs perspective, we've clearly identified a need for additional homes and employment space, and we need to consider the adequacy of the Cambridge Water Resource Management Plan to address both existing and future needs, given that the consequences for the environment are well known to all of you in terms of our current situation and climate change implications. So we're most definitely not advocates for that document. We need to provide a response on your behalf through the member process that is set aside for those out-of-cycle decisions.
Councillor Thornborough.
The closing date for the Cambridge Water Resources Management Plan consultation is the 19th of May, but we have the local elections in Purda. So will we have enough time to do a response? Because even if it's under delegated powers, we do try and get comments from chair and spokes. So I hope we can manage that within the time frame we've got.
We are looking to try and do that, but clearly, in probability, given where we are today, and the fact that we're still crunching through the numbers in that sit behind that plan, it's likely that it will be during the pre-election period that we'll be seeking feedback from members. I think it's really important for this council to make a representation into that process, and so we will do everything we can to find an effective way of doing so.
Thank you very much. That now concludes the Planning and Transport Scrutiny Committee meeting. Thank you to everyone who's taken part. The date of the next meeting is the 27th of June. And I'd just like to thank everyone who's supported me during my year in the chair. Committee managers have been so supportive and quite brilliant, without exception. Thank you so much, and to the officers as well, and you members, thank you.
Chair, can I just say we'd like to thank you for chairing this committee. I think it's been very interesting having you chair, and I think you've been very rigorous in looking at the future plan, what's coming to the committee, and your input's been very positive. And I've certainly appreciated your input as chair.